In Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 through 16, in a message or a letter to Laodicea, it is written, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. When I've always heard this verse talked about and taught from, it's always been taught to me in a certain way. That is, the person teaching would always say that in this verse, God is saying he would rather us be either hot or fiery, on fire for the Lord, or he'd rather us be cold, apart from the Lord, rather than us being lukewarm for him. I always thought that this teaching of the verse was very odd, and recently I found out that I was right to think so. You see, the way that this verse was taught to me, and the way I found that it's taught to many people in the way I described, is not the true meaning of the verse. The true meaning of the verse and the true way it's supposed to be taught can be found when we examine the cultural context surrounding it at the time. So here's the thing. The city in question here, Laodicea, the city this message was written to, was in the middle of two other cities, Hierapolis and Colossae. Hierapolis had many hot springs that produced hot water, and Colossae had many springs that produced cold water. Laodicea, on the other hand, did not have any real source of water. So, in order for the people of Laodicea to receive water, it would be transported in pipes from Hierapolis and Colossae. The problem? By the time the water reached them from either Hierapolis or Colossae, was not cold or hot. It was lukewarm. And lukewarm water is not and was not desirable. The people of Laodicea would have wanted cold water, and they would have wanted hot water. But unfortunately, when the time the water got to them, it was lukewarm, the undesirable of the two. The people of Laodicea would have wanted hot water, and they would have wanted cold water. So when we examine the context surrounding the verse, we find that the meaning behind it is actually much different than the traditional way it's taught in the West. That is, God isn't saying he wants us to either be all for him or all against him rather than lukewarm. He's saying he wants us to be on fire for him and cold for him, which in the context, in the way it was taught, meant he wants us to be all for him. And the thing that was undesirable is that people were being lazy. They were being lukewarm rather than hot or cold, which were both good. It is not God saying he wants us to be all for him or all against him rather than in between. No, it's saying, God's saying, I want you to be all for me, but you're not. You're being lukewarm. The main point in me explaining this? It's simple. We draw from our culture and our experience to interpret the Bible. What's the problem with that? Well, our understanding, our culture, and our cultural context is much different than the understanding, the culture, and the cultural context at the time when the Bible was written. We can even find more examples of this. If you take people from two different cultures and have them read the same Bible verse, you will find something shocking. Where, say, a Westerner find and really focus on one part of the verse, Easterner would focus a lot on a different part of the verse. So we take what we understand from our culture and emphasize certain parts of passages. In the case of Westerners, this leads to what Randolph Richards and Brandon O'Brien call misreading scripture with Western eyes. Hello everybody, my name is Riley, and in this video I'm going to be starting a new series of sorts called Beyond Reading, where I will be taking books that I find interesting and important and breaking them down chapter by chapter per video. The first book in the series is the one I just held up here, Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, which challenges us to, as the cover states, to remove our cultural blinders in order to read the Bible in its proper context and with the understanding of the time, so that we do not misinterpret verses. In this video, we're going to be covering the first chapter of the book, as well as the intro, but I kind of already did that with the beginning part of this video. However, I want to state something here, and I'm going to be stating this probably every single video I make in this series. This video, and nothing else, is going to substitute for picking up the book and reading it yourself. I am purposely not going to go into every small detail because I want you to go out and read this book because number one, we should support the authors that are writing it, and number two, they are going to be able to describe certain concepts and such much better than I can. And they also go much deeper and do it in a much more interesting way. So please, I will have a link to the book down below. If you find this video and the subsequent videos after interesting in regards to this book or any other I cover, they will be linked below, so please check them out. Throughout the series where I'm covering this book in particular, the authors separate the book into 3 different sections, and they make a metaphor to an iceberg about how different things are between cultures. They start with above the surface, which is obviously just above the surface of the iceberg, so the tip of the iceberg type of thing. Then they go to just below the surface, which is just the getting started of how big an iceberg is, to deep below the surface, which is those big cultural differences that really separate the Western thought to the ancient Near Eastern thought of the time. To get started, the first chapter of this book is entitled Serving Two Masters. The purpose of this chapter is to really frame the entire book, and it gets into what we call mores and how they affect our understanding of the Bible. You may be asking what a more is, so I just want to describe it simply here. A more is simply what goes without being said in our culture. In other words, it's what we project onto that which we experience and read and see from our cultural worldview without giving it any second thought. The reason why the book starts here is because understanding our mores really is important for understanding how we project our worldview onto the Bible, and also how we can twist the Bible or misunderstand it because of projecting our Western idea of how things should be onto it. To get started, we need to remember that mores, or what goes without being said, are not something that's static. So if something is true of the West now, it actually may not have been true of the West 1,000 years ago. For example, in the book, the authors give the example of alcohol consumption in America. Not only now is alcohol consumption divided by zones. For example, out near California, alcohol consumption is still seen as something that's perfectly fine. But out in the South, in some areas, you still have things like dry counties where selling alcohol is prohibited. But even more shocking and telling of this is if you look at time gap. 100 years ago, consuming alcohol was seen as something that was almost anathema, as they describe it in the book. It's something that would set you apart from people. It's something that people thought was horrible across the entire country. But nowadays, it's seen as something that's perfectly fine. In addition to this, these mores that we carry, these things that go without being said, can also cause issues to us Westerners when we're interpreting the Bible, which again is an ancient Near Eastern text, because we Westerners have a problem of viewing things in a dualistic mindset. So often we want a yes or no, or a right or wrong answer to things because we do not like ambiguity. I can't say that word very well. Ambiguity. We don't like these random middle zones of things. We want this side or this side, none of this middle stuff. So that's a big problem because in the West that's stressed, but that's not really stressed so much in other parts of the world. But also, this isn't just true of strictly Western mores. We have to remember that Christian mores, what goes without being said as us as Christians, is also different across Christianity as a whole. For example, in the West, when we read the story of something like the Sodomites, the sin of the Sodomites is clear to us. It's sodomy. But as the book mentions, in Indonesia, it's also equally clear to them what the sin of the Sodomites was. But it's not the same as ours. To them, it's equally clear as the sin of the Sodomites being inhospitality, which is much, much different to how us Westerners view it. So we have to be careful in asserting that our way is the right way and theirs the wrong way. There's that dualistic thing again, because depending on the culture that you're influenced by will cause you to take different things from passages and to assert that what goes without being said, if you're a Christian, is wrong in some cultures where that's not always the case. Now, there are some other examples of this very thing and that the book really goes over in this first chapter, but I don't want to get too deep into it because, again, I want you all to go read the book for yourself, and I don't want to take away from the book what it deserves in the support that it receives. So I want to go over a few of those really quickly, though. The first is stuff like sex and marriage. So in the West, being married and things like sex are viewed as more favorable than something like celibacy. But that's not the same as, say, the East, where oftentimes celibacy is seen as more favorable than marriage. Another example is something like money, where as us Westerners, we typically view money as something that's like unlimited. and it's something we have to have. We need to hoard it. We need to make sure we have a lot of it. And alongside that, we attach a lot of stigmas to people. If they don't have money or if they're seen as poor, we think, oh, they just must not be a hard worker or something like that. And that can cause us to misread passages of Scripture. But if you look at the East, they don't see it that way. Oftentimes in the East, money is seen as a limited resource, and they don't want to hoard it. They don't see a need to hoard any money. And there's more and more. For example, there's things like modesty and food, etc., that all these things have their own stigmas attached to it, and their own cultural mores attached to them. And we have to understand that not our own cultural understanding is not the only one. And again, we have to remember, the Bible is not a Western work. It's an ancient Near Eastern work. It's an Eastern work. So, in order to best understand the Bible in context, we need to understand their mores and the culture of that time instead of our own. So the bottom line is that when we're reading the Bible or other ancient works of the time, we need to keep in mind what goes without being said in our mind and in our culture. We need to be careful that we just don't needlessly project our own opinions onto the culture and onto the writings of the time. And we really, really need to make sure that what we believe, our interpretations, our understanding of the Bible lines up with the context of the time. If not, it can lead to some truly dangerous understandings and some false understandings of the Bible, like the example we gave at the very beginning of the video. We need to make sure we do things like look for clues within the text or within the passages of the Bible. For example, if something is repeated over and over and over, it's very likely the author is trying to get you to focus on that. We need to remember that in the ancient times, things were written poetically a lot of times rather than literally. And there's much more that obviously we're going to get into over the next few videos that I'm excited to explain. But all of these things are important. But look for clues, and those clues are going to be more easy to see as we get further into the next videos. But keep that in mind. As we're going through these videos and as you're reading, look for clues in the passage that maybe are telling you, hey, notice this, rather than whatever your cultural context is telling you to notice. And another thing that's important is to read writings from other cultures. Maybe if you can find writings that are translated from modern or ancient theologians from other cultures, read them. Do things like read the ancient, the church fathers. Read their writings, because they're going to have the interpretation of the time, of that very early Eastern context. And so things like that are very important because they can help us to understand the different views coming at us. All right, that's all I have for you today, actually. That's the first chapter. I know the first chapter is a lot shorter than the other ones, but that's all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, subscribe, and give me some feedback below on what if you're interested in this book. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm excited to bring the rest of them to you. I hope that this video is good at framing what's to come. And I know it probably wasn't a lot, but it's very interesting as we get into it. And so I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, thank you for watching, and God bless.